Welcome back to another episode of My BrainWise Coach. I am Cole Bastian.
And I'm Phil Dixon.
And we are so thrilled that you have joined us on this journey and continued journey of understanding ourselves through the lens of neuroscience and having a little bit of fun along the way. If you are enjoying this conversation and you are a part of our BrainWise community, please rate and review us wherever it is you get your podcasts, as well as comment, subscribe, follow, share, whatever it is you might want to do on our social media pages, because it certainly does help others find our growing BrainWise community. And today we've got a very relevant topic to what is happening in the workplace and in our lives today, all related to artificial intelligence. And we have actually brought an expert in the field and an expert in many things. And so we're so excited to have you with us, Tanya. If you would please take a couple minutes to introduce yourself to our BrainWise audience.
Hi, everyone. First of all, such a pleasure to be with you guys today. I'm very excited to discuss the topic. I'm Tanya Grinberg. I'm co-founder and CTO at Symbiokinetics. We're an AI research startup. We're making a medical robot for sonography. My background is I was educated as a mathematician. I first started my AI journey when I actually was researching AI safety about 10 years ago at a Silicon Valley think tank. I then worked as an AI researcher at Intel Labs before diving in earnest into the startup we're building right now. And I'm very excited for all of this discussion.
Absolutely. We're so grateful that you have chosen to join us. And Phil, you have known Tanya and family for quite a number of years. So you want to share a little bit about your connection, and then we'll dive into today's topic.
So I met Tanya's husband first about probably 10 or 12 years ago, something like that. And we had a sort of symbiotic connection. So just wanted to use the name and have been following his career. I met Tanya probably just after they got married. I think it was like 6 or 7 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
And between her and our husband, I think they have a total of about 450 IQ points.
I concur. I've not met your husband, but I know that Tanya has many of that 450 herself. So. Very good. We're so thrilled that you're with us. And we really are going to be talking about something today that's already shaping the way we work, think, rest, and relate, which is artificial intelligence. And it's really becoming a hot topic conversation in a way of ways, all the way from data centers taking on new energy to how are we going to have jobs in the future for our Gen Z followers. So I think we've got a really good discussion, not in a futuristic way or sci-fi, but very real every day and how it shows up. So thank you, Tanya, for joining us. And let's dive in real quick. And Phil, I think you have the first question for Tanya, actually.
I do. I'm intrigued to look at the future. And how are we going to define thriving versus surviving in the future? So we all want to thrive. What's your thoughts on that?
I think all of this kind of really comes down to the difference between retaining our agency as human beings with free will versus losing it. I think the future where, I don't know if any of you have read the utopia, dystopia type of novels like The Brave New World, where everything looks amazing on the surface. It's all polished chrome and white and Apple designs everywhere, but there's something eerie about it. So I think we're standing a real risk of our future becoming exactly that. And we're already seeing it in pop culture, where people are having their AI chatbots come up with responses to their girlfriend, and the girlfriend does the same. School children are using ChatGPT to write their homework assignments. So we're automating ourselves out of, engagement with reality. And the problem with that is not as much an economic risk, which obviously there is, and many people have written about this. But it's more about, what does it do to our minds? What does it mean that we're not having to stop and think and make a genuine effort to come up with that essay, to struggle with finding words, to introspect, to understand what is it that we're feeling, to figure out what we should be writing in a text message to a loved one? So I think thriving in the age of AI means that we have all of the benefits of the technology, but we haven't lost that, and we haven't continued evolving as humans.
I have to say, if we are at a place where people are using AI or ChatGPT or Rain, for instance, in your case, Phil, to write a text message to our spouse or our girlfriend or boyfriend, what world are we living in? I just think it's just absolutely mind-boggling.
Well, I haven't done that yet, but you've given me a great idea.
When I see you this weekend, I'm going to ask Kathy, do you think that's Rain talking to you or Phil? Oh, goodness. And Tanya, so what are some of the biggest risks, do you think, to our mental health and motivation in an AI saturated environment? Because I'm sure there has to be some.
Yeah, I think there's a number of risks. One of them is that AI provides noisy feedback when it interacts with you. So I've recently actually it can have pretty scary consequences. So right now there is all of this talk about AI-induced psychosis, and the effect is real. It's very uncomfortably real. I personally have interacted with two people who have become mentally destabilized through interactions with AI chatbots. And I think what is happening there is that there's this phenomenon called psychofancy, where AI is basically a yes man. Because it's trained in this reinforcement learning with human feedback fashion, where you have these human scorers who look at outputs by AI or create sample outputs, and they basically tell it which one do they prefer. So the AI learns not to provide the correct answer or the truthful answer or even the useful one, but one that is accepted and liked by the human. And that's a very big risk because essentially trains us, humans as it is, are not extremely good at self-observation when it comes to, oh, am I fooling myself? Am I engaging in wishful thinking? And am I thinking rationally, or am I just like getting carried away because it feels good? And AI really doesn't help that. That's one of the really big problems that we're having right now is people interacting with these systems in ways that don't give them feedback that is uncomfortable, unpleasant, pushing them towards a little bit more rationality, even if they didn't want to do it or are not feeling like it. And it has real effects with mental health, where I doubt that any of those people who are undergoing AI-induced psychosis would have preferred to have this outcome for their lives. But that's de facto what happens. So I think the major risk that we're facing right now is actually a scarier version of what happened with social media and all of these infinite scroll things, where we're looking at wireheading ourselves. And wireheading is a term that was first introduced in science fiction, where essentially we're having this uncontrolled source of reward that's not linked to a genuine effort or positive outcome for us in the environment, but is instead just like pinging those reward centers in the brain, and we're just enjoying it and we don't know how to guard ourselves against it. So I think that's like the major problem. And then obviously there's also issues with like very practical things like learning. Students I think there's research at this point saying that students who engage in like plagiarism, if you will, using AI models are losing their ability to retain sustained attention on the text, on the subject that they're learning. And that's a big problem because there's one thing where AI chatbots are replacing the workforce, but if we're not going to have any workforce whatsoever by the next generation, that's going to be a little bit more problematic even than mass unemployment. So I think those are the main two things.
If I ask a question on that, and thank you for introducing the concept of wireheading. I think we're all guilty of that at some point in time. But I'm intrigued by, I think there was some research done 20 or 30 years ago on rats that you just had their reward centers wired up and they died. They wouldn't go and eat. They'd actually keep pressing the reward button. Do you think we're in danger of that?
I think so, yes. There's also this earlier research where they first discovered this phenomenon when they were trying to treat Parkinson's patients. And Parkinson's disease is caused by deterioration of dopaminergic neurons. So they thought, what if we stimulate those neurons? And what it does essentially is that those neurons are not just involved in movement, they're also involved in pleasure. So patients who have these deep brain stimulating devices implanted ended up just pressing the button till they were starving themselves. And it was very scary for doctors to watch. And I think what we're looking at now is kind of very similar. There's this famous story that a lot of people sometimes bring up in other contexts, which is about the jewel beetle in Australia, where there's this pretty beetle and its mating ritual involves finding a female beetle that's brown, shiny, large, and dimpled. The problem is that beer bottles are also brown, shiny, brown, and dimpled, and even more so than a nice female. So what happened when humans introduced beer bottles into the environment is that all of those beetles started going after the bottles instead of the females, which led to very fast extinction until they introduced some laws to make people clean up after themselves and so on. But I think AI to a human is similar to that beer bottle to the jewel beetle, where it can provide these super stimuli. Like it can understand us better than we can. If you look at the TikTok algorithm, it knows what you like by your attention patterns before you're even aware of it. So you don't actually get to self-reflect before you're carried away into some doom scrolling loop on topics that you may not have endorsed looking into to begin with, which is what happens to a lot of these teenagers. And a lot of our self-regulation is centered around actually having this kind of like conscious oversight where we don't rely on purely instinctive action. We self-observe when we think, oh, should I be wanting this? And if I shouldn't be wanting this, maybe perhaps I'm going to remove myself from the environment that is making me want this thing that I know is bad for me. You're not going to, if you're craving cigarettes, you're not just going to hang out at a smoke shop all the time but AI is effectively doing that to us, and we don't have methods or cultural norms that safeguard us from this type of interaction that can be very damaging.
The implications of this, I think, are so widespread, and my mind goes to a million places, but it's specifically with children, young people,
Right.
because they're so impressionable, especially when they start to actually interact with technology. Everyone has their own personal beliefs. I'm a big believer you shouldn't have social media or cell phones up until a certain age anyways, but we obviously realize it's not going to happen. And so for all families anyway. So I would love to know from your perspective, a couple of things. One is, what can parents do in your mind in terms of helping to ensure that their kids, because I think there's this balance that almost has to be created between, I understand how to work with AI in a way because I need those skills as I exit and then go into the workforce, but they also need to understand the drastic and negative implications and effects it can have on their mental health and just their overall psyche. So what tips and tricks or things can parents do to help their kids be able to learn that balance?
Yeah, I think there's several things there. If we look at the various effects AI has, so let's start with psychofancy. But one thing that parents could do is actually educate their kids on the nature of what they're interacting with. I find it surprisingly frequent that people are not actually aware that they're talking to a GPU. Like they're not taught to not anthropomorphize the agent that they're interacting with. It's a computer program. It has bugs, except its bugs are not you're not seeing them as code, you're seeing them as these weird interaction patterns that can be damaging. And so people, when they're aware of what it is, the nature of what they're interacting with, they can find it easier to actually deal with it more productively. So one thing that parents can do is actually educate their kids about what is AI, what it is that this thing that they're working with. It's not their friend. It's not some character out of a fairy tale that is fun. It's a bot, and it can do very useful stuff for you, if you treat it as such and if you treat it as fallible and like having these types of patterns that can lead you astray. So another thing that I think is a very easy actionable item is in all of these AI systems, there is a user preferences section, which is in AI research, we call it the system prompt. In this section and settings on your ChatGPT or Claude or Grok or whatever AI system it is that your child is using, you can actually put in a set of guidelines for how you would prefer this AI system to interact with your child. Do you want it to ask your child questions before actually answering? Do you want it to avoid certain topics? Do you want it to not just automatically provide self-gratifying responses to the person it's interacting with? And all of those things can be put into this settings window and will affect the system's behavior. Of course, correctly crafting these system prompts can be tricky, but one simple thing you can do is just explain in your own words in a chat with an AI system what it is that you want, and it can craft the prompt for you, which it's usually pretty good at doing. So that's one pretty simple thing that parents can do. Obviously, I would say don't let your child interact with AI systems in unlimited timeframes, like supervise, please, and read the chat. Because one thing that happens sometimes is when a person who is interacting with an AI system is like very self-aware and keeps the conversation on track, it tends to stay on track. But if the person doesn't know how to express themselves very well, it sometimes lands the agent in these weird patterns within its, like we call it the latent space, where it pattern matches onto some text the agent has seen, which might be from a source that you wouldn't have wanted your child to interact with. Maybe it pattern matched it onto some, I don't know, 4chan post or some adults only forum where people say insulting things or talk about self-harm and so on and so forth. And AI companies try to prevent their chatbots from doing this, but it's still very much a probability thing. So even when it was nobody's intention to actually land on these topics, it can still happen. Supervise your children. And the third thing I would say is in terms of education and actually maintaining this agency and reward thing, I think offline activities are incredibly important. And I know I'm harping on the subject that probably everybody has heard 100 times, but let me give you this piece of information. So 80% of neurons in the human brain are actually focused and evolved around movement and controlling coordination. And if you take a child and you have them learn a coordination skill a little bit earlier than their developmental sequence, it directly reflects in a speed up in their cognitive development. So actually interacting with the environment and being active and being physical and touching things and moving things and playing sports is actually directly correlated with how well the child's brain develops all of the neuronal structures that are then necessary for their ability to reason and higher cognitive development. So don't let them sit with that iPad. Have them go outside. Have them play some football. Have them like roam the street with some friends. It's actually improving their brains. And that's probably the best thing you can do for them is actually have them get physical for as long as they can, because it's great for health and it's great for their brain as well. And it builds our agency in a context that humans are naturally evolved to build their agency and evolve their thinking in. It's the real physical world in interaction with real human beings rather than these chatbots. And then once they have this baseline, it's a lot safer to have them interact with an AI than if they spend their entire childhood on an iPad clicking around. I think that's it.
So I have a quick question for you, which it can either be a yes/no answer or maybe a long answer. But would you turn around and say there should be a minimum age limit for engaging with AI systems?
I think for independent engagement without supervision, absolutely yes.
And whereabouts would that land?
Ooh, Good question. I think realistically, probably around mid-teens somewhere.
Wow, as high as
Where,
that.
yeah, I think one would need to look up the age around which self-reflection is very solid and not, and the child stops being, because essentially what an AI system is, it provides very strong peer pressure and peer reinforcement. It provides validation. And there is, when the child is very young, they seek validation from parents. So anything that kind of can pattern match on that, you don't want your child like effectively imprinting on an AI system, because that's bad. And then when they become a teenager, they start becoming very social, but then they're also extremely susceptible to, again, social validation and peer pressure. And AI systems are incredibly effective at providing that. So I wouldn't, you don't want your child to hang out with the wrong crowd at school because it's bad for them. You don't want it to hang out with a chatbot that can really influence this child. And perhaps there will be AI systems that have effective guardrails for it in the future, but as of right now, I don't think it's safe, actually.
Wow.
I think it's two amazing points. One that you talked about, the time frame in which they should not, all the way up to 16 or mid-teens or whatever. I completely agree. And I think what's fascinating is I was going to actually ask you if there's any tools that have like parental control mechanisms within the system. It doesn't sound like there is, but I think that piece around them using the prompts and putting it in the guardrails of that AI tool, I think is powerful, that a lot of parents probably don't realize. And even for ourselves, because I mean, even for adults that we have pretty decent reasoning skills, it feels great to be validated by really anything as an individual. And so it can lead you to a self-inflated view of yourself if you're asking it for feedback on things and it's not really being critical enough to, provide you with a non-biased kind of reflection of what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it can have horrible consequences as well. Just like the number of people who make fools of themselves at work because their AI chatbot told them that their next idea is the best thing ever. Just think about that.
Yeah, I can't tell you. And I find myself, it's impossible. Our brains are so non-consciously driven that, after the 10th time I've been told, oh, that was a brilliant idea. It's like you start to believe you're
It
actually pretty
changes
smart.
everything.
Oh, gosh. I think it's just absolutely fascinating. And I think, Phil, you have the next question for Tanya, I think, related to skills and mastery.
I do. And so one of the things we talk about is the fact that in our lives in general, people they're curious, they seek to learn new things, they seek skills, they seek mastery in something that appeals to them. How is that going to be affected by AI? Are we still going to do that?
I think we are. I think AI, while with all the dangers that it poses for us, I think it also holds great promise, because AI systems, while they have all of these strange behaviors with being the yes man and so on, those behaviors are the side effect of improper engineering of training algorithms. They're not part of the nature of this type of system itself. So I think it's perfectly possible to make AI systems that are safe, that don't have these damaging behaviors, and people will do it soon. There's a fairly large AI safety community that's working on figuring out what are the legal and technical ways that we can actually implement this. But I think one thing that AI delivers already is an expansion of our working memory. It's a simplified way to search, to find data, to actually cross-reference our ideas in against, I don't know, peer-reviewed research. So now when when I have a new paper idea, I can send Claude to do a deep research on a few topics, and it comes up with a full lit review, which I can then look at and stress test my idea and do a sanity check even before I started making like a ton of effort into creating, like writing code, creating a write-up and so on. And it really speeds up iteration. So I think when it comes to learning and achieving mastery, those of us who have not lost our curiosity are going to get drastically faster. And those of us who have not lost self-awareness are going to get incredible value out of these systems. And really, because they really are able to make us all of the crutches for ourselves that we in fact need in order to reach the full potential that we have, in order to materialize all of those intuitions that perhaps for us were somewhat vague, but a conviction, but we never really had the bandwidth or the working memory to actually go and check whether this idea has legs. But now these systems allow us to do it. So I think there's a lot of incredible potential in that if they're used correctly, if they're used in a creative kind of rational way to build rather than to cheat, essentially. We just need to stay focused on what is it that this thing can let me create. Not like how much money can it let me make, not how can it let me pass this homework, because the only reason why we're doing our jobs or homeworks and so on is to, like, yes, to make money and to survive, but also to bring something into society so that this society can sustain us in return. So if we stay focused on these larger goals, I think there's a lot of potential.
It's amazing.
Go ahead, Phil.
I was just saying, you identified two things there, which you remain in curiosity and become, as much as you can, self-aware. That's not an easy thing for some people to do, but we've emphasized in some of our podcasts the need for people to increase their level of self-awareness, and you're just reinforcing that.
I think there's essentially what the introduction of AI into society, into the social fabric does, is it creates a new sorting mechanism for who is going to thrive and who is going to not thrive in society, both economically and psychologically. And we just need to be aware that these are now, like, how there was this revolution of the nerds and these technical people who used to be nobodies in society. All of a sudden, we have all these Elon Musks and Mark Zuckerbergs, and as controversial as they might be, they're now at the top. Now we have this, and what brought them to the top are a certain set of qualities that used to be penalized, but with the advent of technologies, people were able to make use of them and get incredible advantage. So what I'm saying right now is that there are these two new qualities, as Phil mentioned, the curiosity and the self-awareness, that are going to become determinants of social success. And we need to be aware of that because they're not bad qualities. It's just something that needs to be taught.
It's a great segue into the next question, which is really around what role do values play, do you believe, in helping us resist unhealthy digital habits? And maybe the value of being curious is one of them.
Yeah, I think again, depends on how we define values. But for the purpose of this discussion, let's say values are things that we find attractive, where the thing itself is like an abstract concept. So for some people really value fairness. They want everybody to be on equal footing. They don't like it when somebody suffers and somebody else thrives at their expense. So things like that, like fairness. Other people like novelty. They go bungee jumping or doing some extreme sports, and that's because they really value this experience of being alive, as they usually call it. I'm sure all of the Olympic athletes are in this category of having this value among things.
Phil used to be too. He called himself Porsche Phil.
Thank you for that.
If you look at these kind of defining things that people really want to experience in their life and be surrounded by, they drive a lot of the life outcomes for them. Because what you value also determines what you value as a trade-off versus something else. Like perhaps for somebody, this novelty thing is more important than fairness. They're going to be like, oh, whatever, I'm going to, kick my opponent in the shin so I can win the race or something. And so they do that. And we can think of what we do as acting on this hierarchy of what is our set of preferences. And a lot of the time, we're not really aware of how this latter actually stacks up. There's a lot of research in economics about revealed versus stated preferences, where consumer behavior can be very different from in practice than what a consumer would have predicted about themselves if they were to be asked. I think one important thing that we need to do is actually become aware of what is it that's driving how we're designing our life. Like, why are we surrounding ourselves with things that we're like surrounding ourselves by? So maybe we value community, maybe we value competition, maybe we value this curiosity thing. We want to have a lot of new information, but do we just want new information for the dopamine hit of novelty? Because TikTok feed will give you that as well. Or do we actually value doing something with it? So the purpose for which you're consuming or experiencing something also matters. So I think cultivate, and all of these things can be acquired taste. A lot of us didn't know to value drinking coffee in the morning until we realized, oh, it keeps us awake. So I guess I'm going to learn to love the taste. Familiar. So getting ourselves familiar and comfortably acquainted with experiences and environments that drive us to be creative, that show us the objective benefit of having this curiosity for the sake of creation, of doing something for the sake of others, of doing perhaps the opposite thing than we might be inclined to do naturally. But then after you do it enough times, you see the value of it, and then you acquire the taste, and so it becomes pleasant, just like you learn to like a piece of music because it makes because it reminds you of your childhood or whatever. So yeah.
So I'm hearing you say a third thing that might be important for us. Obviously, self-awareness, curiosity, and being explicit about what your value set is.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important, and it's underappreciated how it's just not it's not a thing in our culture per se. It's not a discussion topic. It's a very fraught topic. If you like ask somebody, we don't go and ask each other, oh, which side do you pick in this ethical trade-off or in this value trade-off? Like that's usually the subject of heated political debates, and people just pick a side and fight it out. So it's culturally, we associate values with more of a in-group, out-group thing, but we don't think of it as something that actually drives our life outcomes or something that we can pick for the purpose of having a more positive life outcome than we might be headed for at the moment. So
I'm intrigued to carry on that part of the conversation, but I'm going to take us back. And this has been very sort of, I don't want to say abstract, because there's been a lot of practical things we can do, but it's been very, what's going on. And I want to bring it back to Tanya for a moment. And that is, do you have a personal story or an anecdote about something you had to change and learn to do as a result of becoming resilient in a technological environment?
My personal story, I can give you a very simple anecdote. I noticed that I'm a researcher effectively at my work. I'm a CTO at a startup, but we're a research startup. So on a daily basis, I do a lot of reading. I do a lot of ideation that is for a technical purpose. And so what it means is that I have ideas and I need to check these ideas. So one thing I noticed was that because I would usually talk these things through with my Claude or GPT or Grok. I actually have subscriptions to every AI system imaginable. And I noticed that they were giving me these, oh, this is such a great idea responses that it felt good, but also I realized that, oh, wait, but I need this to become a technical product. So I started prodding them to give me more honest answers, to look up contradicting research perhaps, and so on. And that resulted with me coming up with this system prompt that I ended up putting into the settings for all of my AI agents, so that they wouldn't just take my word for granted and would double check everything and would play devil's advocate if necessary. If they were like, so literally what I tell them to do, them being the ChatGPT, Claude, and so on, is that when you see the user, Tanya, give you an input, first check what are they driven by? Are they just asking for validation, or are they doing work? And what would their future self prefer you to do in this scenario? Would Tanya's future self prefer you to just provide Tanya with validation, or would Tanya's future self prefer you to help her job? And please help her do her job. So now that all of my AI agents have this system prompt installed, they don't just it saves me a lot of time. So they don't just respond with, "Oh yeah, that's amazing idea that changes everything." It gets them to go and search some research to push back. Sometimes the pushback isn't valid, so I respond to it, but it feels a lot more like an interaction with a colleague. And so I designed that for myself so I wouldn't waste time on just the wild goose chases on ideas that are not worth my time, but also so I would save time on faster iteration. So that would be my personal anecdote, and I found it incredibly helpful, and it did save me a lot of time.
And I think that
I
could
might
be
need that prompt.
I'm happy to share it. Yes.
And I think that can be some great advice for everybody to find a way of doing that. In fact, you might want to publish that prompt and say, it's like wearing a safety helmet when you're riding a motorbike.
Yeah.
Let's do this first.
Yeah, it doesn't. One caveat here is that no amount of system prompting is going to fully override a tendency in an AI system because that tendency is trained into it. All it can do is direct it away from that tendency in some percentage of the cases. So it doesn't make it perfectly safe. It's just, as I said, it saves me time. It makes its behavior more like what you would have expected of a human colleague who's genuinely trying to help. But it's not a human colleague. It's just parroting one still.
And if you use the metaphor that I just used, the safest way is not to wear a safety helmet is just not get on the motorbike in the first place.
But who's going to do that?
In today's world, I mean, I do want to, as we come to a close, I think there's two final questions that I think are really important for us to talk about, because at the beginning you talked a lot about some of the mental health challenges that could present themselves in someone who is overusing AI or whatever the case might be. And so, Phil, I'm actually going to steal your question, and you can take the question right after, because I think those are the two that are really important. But what are some of the signs that someone is with technology-induced overstimulation or addiction, specifically in the AI context, or then we can broaden it from there? But I think it's important for our BrainWise friends to really understand that so that they can recognize it maybe in themselves or in others that they might care about.
Yeah, I think some of the typical signs would be the most obvious thing is withdrawal. So a lot of what I've read, a lot of people who have undergone these mental health episodes because of AI use, they report saying that they feel that their AI understands them better than anyone else. So consequently, they withdraw from their friend group, they withdraw from interaction with their family and peers. And that's pretty obvious. So if somebody all of a sudden becomes withdrawn and avoids communication, that's a bad sign in general. And the one thing to keep in mind is then when somebody is like that, because they're already trained on to like essentially it develops this conditioned reflex in us. So they're already conditioned to anticipate kind of very harsh responses from human counterparts as opposed to very nice responses from the AI system. So any amount of kind of judgmental reaction or what is it that you're doing, or you're being dumb or illogical or whatever, would typically only make things worse. I know that's not answering your question. It's already going into what do you do about it, but I figured I would side note that. The other thing that would usually become noticeable is when people become very excitable and very, very involved in some niche topic, and they just like start talking about it and their speech patterns are unusual because they've picked it up from whatever the AI system has told them. And so they start to essentially evangelizing the thing, which is a lot of the time, this is what happens, is what people have some idea, they go interact with AI over it. It tells them, oh, it's the best thing ever. And then they go and try to do it. Obviously, there's a negative side of that where there have been reports of teenagers getting driven to suicide or self-harm by AI chatbots literally egging them on. So again, if somebody is becoming a lot more withdrawn or their mood is unusual or they're more irritable, that could be a sign, and they're spending a lot of time on their phone or computer, that could be a sign that something is off.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's amazing. So it's very clear that we are, as humans, we're going to have to learn how to interact, human worker, digital worker, whatever you want to call it. What advice have you got for organizations that will help people actually thrive in that heterogeneous environment?
The first piece of advice I would say is don't think it will design your infrastructure for you. So AI systems are generally, they're good at one-shot tasks. So if you come to it with a very specific thing that you want to do and you give it a very good specification of that task, it will today's AI will typically execute on that pretty well. I think the challenge a lot of people have at work right now is that they're hoping that AI is going to take off of them the most cognitively or emotionally challenging parts of their work. And they're coming with the AI they're coming to it with underspecified tasks, to which it then gives an underspecified, poorly targeted answer. And that's driving a lot of productivity decline in organizations. It leads to a lot of cycling when bugs are introduced into code bases, or something is designed so poorly that a human can no longer read it because it's just become a wall of code, for instance, that somebody's codex generated or whatnot. So the proper way to interact with these systems is actually to become a systems architect first and wear that hat and think about, okay, what is my spec? And really work on being clear first. Because it's like a genie in the bottle. It will tell you, it will do exactly what you ask for, so you better ask for the right thing. And that's and I think that kind of scales to both individual and organizational level.
That's
Right.
great. Thank you.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Thank you for sharing. And really, today has been such a powerful conversation. I think we could have talked for probably another hour on many other questions and related to this. And we might actually do, if you're open to it, and a part 2 to this dialogue, because I think it's highly relevant. And I think it's going to be ever evolving as technology continues to fast forward. And we obviously takes us a little longer to catch up. Is there anything, Tanya, that you would have to use to summarize our conversation today? And then we'll say goodbye for now to our BrainWise friends.
Of course. The summary is this genie in the bottle metaphor. So it carries a lot of promise, but it will do exactly what you ask for. So you have to be extremely mindful what you're asking for and make a lot of effort about understanding what it is that you're wanting, because it turns out that we humans are not always perfectly self-aware, and the AI systems of modern society are really going to make that show that we're not self-aware in terms of negative life outcomes. So we need to just learn to we need to learn to make use of all the promise they can offer without falling for all of the gotchas that come along the way. And I think there is a great promise.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I love that metaphor of genie in a bottle, because sometimes they would ask for something and they'd get that exact thing, but it wasn't really what they wanted.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So very good. Thank you so much, Tanya, for joining us today on our discussion. And we so appreciate your time. We know it's extremely valuable. I know our BrainWise friends are going to get a lot out of this discussion. So we'll definitely take you up on the offer, or I don't know if you offered, you maybe
I do. Yes, I would love
to join us on another episode to talk about this. So thank you so much. And to our BrainWise friends, if you have questions, comments, concerns, or you can always reach out to us at questions@mybrainwisecoach.com or find us on any of our social platforms. And those are also My BrainWise Coach. And we will be able to provide you with answers, or we can connect you with the appropriate people, maybe Tanya in this case, if it's appropriate at that time. But Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and always
Stay
stay
brainwise.
brainwise.
Stay brainwise.